So today we get to talk about the Oracle of Delphi, and no, this isn't a history channel I've pivoted to, this is still the gaming news. Here's the reason why. What if I told you that the people claiming credit for the brilliant 007 First Light just put out a game that has been described as, quote, a modern hellscape and an embarrassment to everyone involved. So juicy. And to top it off, just 2 months after the shitty game launched, they pulled funding from the studio that made it, a studio they part own, with 80% of the staff losing their jobs. Now this group says their ambition is to, quote, show players what's possible when you build AAA games outside the legacy system. Oh, it is part of a plan to change the industry. The way that they treat licensed games and the developers who make them is very much a throwback to a very familiar and not particularly good type of game development. You probably haven't heard of Delphi Interactive, but I think we all know what they're getting at by choosing a name like that. According to them, they're the reason that you got to play 007 First Light this year. Well, I don't know if you played it, but I did, and tell you what, really good game. Really like it. Bond fan. Now, as it turns out, this group, Delphi, are involved, and whenever they first revealed themselves to the public, they told GameIndustry.biz this. For that project, of course, that's them speaking about 007. Delphi originated the concept, secured the license from MGM Danjak, engaged IO Interactive as a developer and publisher, and financed the vertical slice. Now that's kind of interesting. In plain terms, they are basically a middleman, a facilitator. They exist to grease the wheels of things. Which isn't to say they did nothing, like they did buy the license, they funded early development work, and they did carry that risk at that earlier stage so that nobody else had to, which is fair and useful. And to be fair, they don't claim all the credit. They know that IO Interactive are, as they put it, a world-class developer. And that they absolutely are. But the implication does hang there, that without Delphi, 2026 would have been our 14th year in a row without a premium James Bond game. And that's because Delphi are interested in one thing and one thing only: making licensed AAA games faster, better, and more creatively ambitious than what the industry has come to expect. And you can see the PR strategy. Announce yourself alongside 007 First Light, and it all does really sound like a noble goal. And maybe even an achievable one, because man, what a first hit. The slight problem is their second game came out, and it really didn't go good. It's a game with another massive property, one that could have crowned them the king of licensed games. But it did not work out, because it turned out to be a nightmare hellscape, and, to quote our earlier reviewer, an embarrassment to everyone involved. Delphi's follow-up to 007 First Light was one of Netflix's, quote, most successful cloud debuts. Hell yeah. That is how Netflix leadership described what the game actually is, which I'll now show you. It's their World Cup tie-in, FIFA World Cup Launch Edition. They talked about this in their Q2 financial report, and it is quite something. Now, Game Developer covered the follow-up earnings call where co-CEO Greg Peters said that the game had really solid numbers that put it in the top tier of game performance for us. I feel like the for us is probably doing a lot of heavy lifting there. But to move on, GameFile, via an interview that they conducted with Delphi, put it at 1.5 million players in just its first week. Those are respectable numbers, and thus far, it doesn't seem like a disaster of a game. But I do have to be real with you. It is a disaster. It is a free FIFA game on a huge service, Netflix, running during the goddamn World Cup. And here's all these exec people talking about how it got great numbers. Of course it got great numbers. It was FIFA during the World Cup. But notice what Peters never mentions: quality. Audience reaction, because those things were absolutely awful. And for a bit of color in that, Aftermath's review title was particularly pointed. Netflix's FIFA World Cup video game is a modern hellscape and an embarrassment to everyone involved. Yes, that is where that quote from the top came from. And the game is something to behold. Awful graphics, terrible animations, gameplay that basically makes no sense. A truly miserable experience. And for the first time in a long time, one that EA or Konami had absolutely nothing to do with. So what this was a bespoke product built from scratch to use the FIFA license, all timed for the World Cup. And certainly given the vibes around FIFA these days, I think we all know that customer experience or viewer experience is really not their main goal. So I guess with it being such a qualitative failure, you can understand why the developer, Refactor Games, just fired almost all of their staff. The layoffs were first spotted by Game Developer, where last weekend, Refactor's staff began posting that they had been laid off. A statement from founder Nathan Burba would then go on to confirm it, with 80% of the studio being gone. From the outside, there is obviously a cold logic to this. I mean, it is a team that shipped a World Cup tie-in really poorly. The World Cup has, of course, ended. And that means there's kind of nothing for them to do in this game, right? Well, no, because it's really not that simple. There is more going on here than just a World Cup contract or something running out. And that sure is the case for Refactor. They were founded in 2021 to build emergent sports games, but their 2022 debut game, American Football Simulator, reviewed reasonably well, but never really broke through commercially. Obviously, they wanted a bit of Football Manager, but they didn't get it. Now, this Netflix deal was, in a way, a lifeline, a perfect alignment of their tech and, of course, the FIFA license. And that's where Delphi Interactive came in. They part-own Refactor, and that connection helped them secure the FIFA license in the first place. It, of course, did not end up counting for much. Insider Gaming have sources on the story, and they say the layoff order came straight from Delphi and did confirm that 80 people were laid off. Here's their reporting. Delphi Interactive, which partially owned the studio, pulled funding after the game's launch. The decision to cancel the contract with Refactor Games came without warning, according to those who spoke with Insider Gaming under the condition they not be named. So, what we can garner from this is that it's not a story of a client just deciding to drop an external contractor. No, Delphi actually have owned a piece of this studio for 5 years, and now they've defunded it without warning 2 months after a game shipped. Of course, the game was shit, so some of that is understandable, but we should probably ask why the game turned out that way. And also, what was the plan? Was this always supposed to be some quick little cash grab? Get some tasty money from Netflix and run away when it doesn't turn out right? Well, the implication is that Refactor were promised longer-term support, basically refitting the game and keeping it going after the World Cup. Now, on that thread, the leadership are reportedly hoping to rehire staff whenever more contract work lands, but obviously Delphi felt comfortable just cutting their losses now. And that is because, in an era where we're actually seeing some of the best licensed games we've ever had, Delphi seems to want to go back to a very different and really quite bad way of doing things. The best licensed games of recent years have came from established teams using licenses to make great games. That means Space Marine 2, Marvel Rivals, Indiana Jones, Spider-Man, RoboCop, Total War. Think of, say, Saber Interactive. They built up a team, produced licensed games, and then they used that success to make even more games with the same tech and the same developers. That's how World War Z turned into Space Marine 2, and they recently told the game business how Space Marine 2 effectively revitalized their business, giving them way more opportunities. So Saber's value then, is it their IP? Or is it their staff and their technology, and how effectively those two things work together? I think it's quite obviously the latter. If good IP was the only thing that mattered, then the endless torrent of Warhammer 40k slop games that just get instantly memory hold, wouldn't have really turned out like that, right? And what that means is that on the one hand, we have those teams who pitch for licenses directly and build studios around delivering on that fantasy. Are good examples. But in Delphi, we see a group who wants to operate like contractors and subcontractors. It's a middleman business model. And of course, that is not a new thing. Longtime viewers of the channel may remember the absolute banger that was Kong Skull Island, or The Lord of the Rings Gollum, two terrible licensed games and massive disappointments for anyone who bought them. It really does break the mind trying to picture how the hell any of those things came into being. But the good news is, The Verge just went and spoke to the people who made the Kong game. And when they did, they found basically a team of between 2 and 20 people, just fluctuating all over the place through the development process, that were given 12 months. 12 months to build the game from scratch. But it wouldn't be the absurd timeline that we all love to live in if there wasn't a bit of normative determinism in this, because the outsourcing job for this game came from a company called Game Mill. Game Mill! I mean, you may as well just call your company like Slop Factory or something. What the hell? Anyway, it was an outsourcing job from noted content farm Game Mill to a Chilean studio called Iguana B, and of course it had to ship in time for the movie release. Obviously a shit show, and while there's a few differences between this and the FIFA World Cup game, it very much is slop rushed out under terrible circumstances to hit an external deadline. Now there's also then the game Gollum, and Game 2 investigated it, and they found a team crunching hard to meet the license's demands on a minimal budget. In both cases, making the game on the cheap mattered a lot more than making the game well or building for the future. And that, it seems, is the world that Refactored just lived through. One where the moment Delphi had no immediate commercial need for those staff, the staff were gone. No consistency, no growth, just whatever team Delphi can get access to. And it's for a reason I think we all know from our own lives. We all have projects that are just foobar, you know, shit that goes wrong. But you know what? Sometimes the lessons that stick are the lessons that actually sting, that come from failure. And what's worse is that so much of the time, devs get blamed, devs get fired, broadly similar leadership stays, and they go on to make the same mistakes again and again and again. Looking at you, 343 Industries. But to return to the story, this World Cup game is the first real example of this model in action. A FIFA license going to Delphi, rather than perhaps a established developer who may have done a better job, or, in Refactor's case, a team actually given the resources and the time to do the project right. Now, maybe this model produces a good game every now and then, but it does not build anything that lasts. And in a world where, in terms of many of the big, commercial AAA projects, it feels like we might just have a game quality problem, I think the likes of this do kind of show us why. Experience, knowledge, lessons learned, they just leave the industry because the industry just treats people like shit and IP as the real asset, seemingly without always understanding that in order to exploit the IP, you actually need people who are really, really good at their job. And credit to them, over in Japan, I think they understand that. You just need to look at, say, Capcom, who directly credit the quality of their games with the retention on their teams. Delphi's model rests on a fairly simple belief, and that is that venture capital style disruption, backed, by the way, by actual venture capitalists like A16Z's Speedrun, that they can make licensed games in a way that the rest of the games industry just can't. And judging by FIFA World Cup Launch Edition, they're not wrong. The rest of the industry, while it has problems, it isn't in the habit of releasing games of that quality. And worse than that, in treating Refactor the way they have, Delphi have shown that they're not interested in the developers making the games. To them, a license is a commodity, something to trade and to rent out to the most efficient bidder. That can result in good games. But as we see here, 007 being good was an IO Interactive thing. It was not a Delphi thing. IO Interactive's track record of games is damn good at this stage. Delphi's looks a hell of a lot worse. It was starting to feel like licensed games were getting away from all that bullshit of a license being thrust onto some random cheap team and the game being a heap of shite. But that is clearly not the future that Delphi envisions. But hey, you know what, Delphi? You got the bag from Netflix, so you're fine, right? And everything worked out well, because you're not a game developer. No, you're a middleman. Simple as. And middlemen, they do tend to just make the whole thing a lot less efficient. So yeah, pretty shit. I do personally hope that they fail. You know, one of the theories of the Oracle of Delphi, so the thing in Greece, quite a few years ago, had to do with, I forget the details, but I think it was like hallucinogenic, I don't know, herbs or something. And that just kind of connects things. Because maybe Delphi are like, supposedly, the Oracle of Delphi. Maybe they're all just really high, and that's why they thought that this World Cup game would work. That's my leading theory. Don't know if it's true, but I'll tell you what we do have some pretty compelling theories for that are backed up with a lot of evidence. Microsoft and Halo Studios being very, very odd groups of people and processes that are incapable of giving John Halo what he deserves. And if you want to see me chomp down on a black pill, well, watch that video next, because it's time to let John sleep.